Please welcome Ashish Jain, Chief Technology Officer at OneSpan, presenting Beyond Authentication, the Path to Digital Trust.
This is a perfect soundtrack. 20 years we are trying to get rid of passwords. We even built a conference around it, and we are still not done. This does sound like Mission Impossible, doesn't it? Thank you for having me. My name is Ashish Jain. I've been part of this industry and community for a while in a variety of roles. I started with Ping Identity over 20 years ago in the early days of SAML. I was at eBay where I led INT risk and trust teams. In 2019, we were the first ones to launch WebAuthn for consumers. I spent some time around fraud detection with Arcos Labs, and now I'm the CTO for OneSpan, where we provide authentication solutions to many of the large institutions and banks. We have been a FIDO member since the very beginning, and also very recently, we acquired Knock Knock Labs, a pioneer and a founding member of the FIDO Alliance. So definitely a very strong supporter and believer of the work that we are doing in this community. Now, over the years, I have had discussions with many of you, which is in addition to authentication, which is one of the building blocks of what you are doing to build secure, trusted digital interactions on the internet. And there is so much commonality into what each one of us are doing. So this session is my attempt to summarize some of those discussions and put a framework around it. For as long as the humans have existed, we have always done transactions with each other. I'll trade you my goat for your bag of grain. It was easy because I'm able to see you, I'm able to make eye contact, shake your hands, because trust was physical. I knew who I was dealing with. As we evolved, humans started to interact with the business or banks or organizations, and even then, I will trade at my local bank. I know the teller knows my family, so there is implicit trust. As we continue to evolve, you see business or organizations interacting with other business or organizations. Think of that, a bank interacting with an insurance provider or a mortgage company. And then we continue to evolve, if you think about today, where we have machines interacting with the organizations, machines interacting with other machines. We interacting with the machines, think about your Wi-Fi router, your thermostat, or your TV. Now, throughout all of those interactions in between people, entities, organizations, machines, one thing has remained common, and which has been the cornerstone of every transaction, and that is trust. Trust has been that currency which has always powered human interaction, and we have to rebuild that same trust as we go deeper into the digital world. Now, the challenge, of course, is that the digital world is missing the natural cues that you see in the physical world. The handshake, the eye contact, the reputation of a familiar face. So we have to rebuild that trust. If I'm not able to see you or touch you or hear you, I have to build the trust and the confidence in an environment that is fundamentally anonymous. And how do I do that? I need to know that I am able to identify and verify the person I'm interacting with. I need to make sure that I'm able to authenticate and know that you are who you say you are. And on top of that, I need to make sure that I'm not interacting with bad actors or people with bad intentions. And in the digital world, I will qualify all of that as a fraud detection. Now, in the physical world, trust is emotional. In the digital world, trust is an architecture. It's an architecture that's based on some of these building blocks, and you can compare that to the modern transportation safety system where you have a seat belt, you have sensors, you have airbags, you have lane assist. You don't rely on any single one of them for your safety, but the coordination of all of them is what makes you trust into the system. And on the similar lines, we need a similar stack, which I'm referring to as the trust stack in this discussion, to build secure and trust into the digital interactions on a daily basis. I'm going to spend the next few minutes going one more level deeper into each of those line items. So let's start with authentication. I'm sure you have heard that of quite a number of times in the last few days, that we have to find the right balance in between security and usability. To be honest, I think it's more than a balance. I think it's a tension in between the security and the experience. The simplest of examples, you can have a 6-digit password or you can have a 10-digit password. I think we all know which one is easier to type in and result in a better conversion numbers. We also all know which one is more secure. So how do you decide? Do you focus on growth, or is that okay to have some bad actors coming in? And how many bad actors are okay? I found this recommendation from a Gartner paper from 2018, which talks about conditional authentication logic. If you're coming from inside the network, skip MFA. If you have recently done an MFA and you have coming from a same device, skip MFA, otherwise do MFA. The bottom line is, please do not do MFA unless you have to do MFA, which goes back to don't have your users hate you. And the reason why it existed is because we were never able to strike the right balance. Of course, over the years, we have built a number of authentication methods in between OTPs and SMS and email push notifications. Sometimes we decided which one to use based on our industry peers. Sometimes we decided that based on our audience's preferences. Sometimes we picked up whatever our vendor supported. But that dance in between security and user experience has always remained the same, which is why it's kind of exciting to be standing here today, listening in the last few days that I almost feel like we are to a point where we have been able to crack that puzzle. That's not to say there is not work to be done. There are challenges with passkeys that also brought up in the last few days in terms of account recovery, consistency in the experience, maybe high assurance use cases. But I feel fairly confident in making the statement that we are at a point that for the most part, we get to make the statement that we have a default global authentication method in passkeys that we can all get behind. A clap would be nice at this time, by the way. Now, authentication itself, as you know, is not enough. I still need to know who I am interacting with, and that kind of brings back to verification. Now, we club a number of things under verification, but in reality, it's more of a spectrum. On one side, I need to know whether or not you are a human versus bot. In some cases, I need to know the possession of an email address or a phone number. If I'm giving you an employment, I would like to do your background employment check. If I'm going to issue you a 1099 or do a payout, I need to do a KYC. And many times, these verification requirements get dictated either by fraud, my willingness to personalize it, sometimes by access control, and as you move towards the right, more by compliance. The challenge, of course, with verification is that it is expensive, it is inconsistent, and with AI, it's becoming more and more complicated. The most default method that you see today is scan a document issued ID, do a liveness test, and that essentially becomes your verification. As you know, there is not really a global standard for government issued documents, even for issued documents by a state. So the relying parties have to spend the time to parse the document, do fact checking, validate it, build a case management system and a support team in case you're not able to read the document. On a ballpark, even if you do it at scale, the cost of KYC is somewhere between $1.50 and $2 per user. Now multiply that by the millions, and suddenly trust is a line item in your P&L. And it's not that easy for the end users either, because you have to go through that process over and over. If I open an account with the bank one, I have to go through that process. A day later, if I open an account with the bank two, I have to again submit the same document and the same liveness test. It's almost like saying you have to get a new driver's license every time you want to get a new car. All of those problems existed before we had AI. And now creating a fake document ID is only a prompt away. And good luck trying to tweak your models to be able to detect fake document IDs, because the models to innovate and create more authentic looking fake IDs is innovating at a much faster pace. On top of that, you have deepfakes. I'm pretty sure all of your LinkedIn feeds are full of people trying to demo you how quickly they can impersonate anybody. For the longest time, vision and hearing have been our two primary strongest senses that we have relied on for authentication and recognition. With deepfake, both of that gets compromised. In a number of seconds, I get your video data or audio data, and I'm able to fake create your identity. Now, if it all looks like challenging, the good part is there is a number of people trying to work on the problem. I got this quote from Tannenbaum. It was in the context of networking, but I think it fits even better for verification that we love standards, and that's why we have so many of them. There are a number of organizations between ISO and NIST and W3C all trying to put their heads together to solve that challenge. And of course, there are a number of specs that the industry has been working upon. Sometimes these specs are interoperable, sometimes they're overlapping, sometimes competing. Now, as a user, you may make the assessment that this is complicated and overwhelming and overbearing and whatever words come to your mind. On the other hand, you can also do the assessment. There is acknowledgement of the problem, and there is a lot of momentum and excitement and effort being put into building and creating that ecosystem. And I strongly believe that what passkeys have done for authentication, the wallet, the verifiable credentials, and the ecosystem has the potential to do the same thing for verification, to build a scalable, secure, cost-effective, and a user-friendly way to prove digitally that I am over 18. Now, authentication and verification makes complete sense, but there is this also a wild card, which is fraud. There is always somebody who's trying to game the system, and you can think of fraud as the background music of the internet, which never goes away. It may slow down, it may get louder, but it is always there. Fraudsters, as you know, have industrialized. They automate, they share playbooks, they do their testing similar to your QA teams. They're able to simulate devices, proxy IP, steal user gestures and behaviors, employ bots to, again, create behavior patterns similar to the end users. And the irony of all of this is the better we get at user experience, the more invisible the fraud becomes. The more we focus on creating a frictionless experience, the easier it becomes fraudsters to pass by. There was an example yesterday by Visa in the keynote that in '94, when you ordered the first online pizza, after the order, somebody will make a phone call. Now, it may sound amusing, but those were the controls in place. Today, when we do a one-click login or tap to pay, we are bypassing the natural tripwires that were put in place to be able to control points for fraudsters. And that all ends up going away. What that means is that the modern detection systems also have to evolve to be able to have a number of signals, and I know Andy mentioned that earlier today, in between the IP reputation, device fingerprinting, behavior biometrics, app telemetry, email and phone reputation, and you don't really need all of them. Sometimes it depends on your business and your maturity and the type of attacks. But the idea that you need a plugin framework where you are able to insert those systems to build a detection system that is always there and continuously watching over the interactions is something I believe you all need. The detection systems of today cannot just be static rules which says yes and a no. It has to say yes with a score of 62. So it's probabilistic, it is continuously learning, and it is adaptive. Now, the fraud system also needs to know when to step in, when to challenge, and when to just take a back seat and let the transactions go. And that kind of brings it into the fold called orchestration. Authentication, verification, and fraud detection are all pieces of the puzzle, and orchestration is what brings that coherent. Think of the other components as independent, disconnected checkpoints, and you need a brain, something that is able to bring the system and the signals together into a fold and have those dynamic decisions. Many times, authentication is on the login of the end user journey. Verification is either at onboarding and maybe at account recovery. And then you have fraud detection mainly around transaction, and orchestration, which works across the customer journey and able to bring all of those things together. If we take a step back, trust is not a product that you can buy. It is not a box that you can check. It is an ecosystem of connected intelligence which brings together authentication, verification, fraud detection, and orchestration. You may decide to build all of that by yourself. You may completely outsource it. You may decide to pick pieces from the vendors and stitch it all together. But at the end of the day, you kind of need this framework to make sure that you can build trust in your digital interactions. And the more I talk to the organizations, I almost feel like I see them in two camps. There is one set of entities where they all have it, but it grew over years as a monolith. So the boundaries in between these blocks is not as apparent, so sometimes it makes it harder to check the progress that you have done on each of these boxes. It also makes it harder to increase the velocity of delivery if the lines are so blurry. Then there is the rest of the organizations where each of them are disconnected. Verification is owned by compliance. Authentication is owned by identity and growth. Fraud detection is owned by risk. Orchestration is something which everybody ends up owning, so you have duplicate. So even though you have all the pieces, they are working in isolation as compared to working it together. I'm going to end with a story. This is the story about how we prioritize things, and sometimes forcing functions can help us look at things very differently. So there was this disciple which goes to a monk and says, I would like to be your student. The monk says, good enough. I'm going to give you a list of scriptures. I would like you to go home, memorize them, and come back tomorrow. Disciple says, good enough. He goes home, comes back the next day and tells to the monk, I tried, but I got some other priorities. He didn't use the word priorities, but you get the intent. So I'm not able to do it. And the monk says, no worries, go home, memorize them, come back tomorrow. Disciple goes back, comes back the next day. He said, I was really trying very hard, got into some edge cases, wasn't able to finish it. The monk says, no problem, go home, memorize them, come back tomorrow. That goes on for a week. The disciple comes back a week later, same story. The monk says, no problem, go home, memorize them, come back tomorrow. And by the way, if you're not finished by tomorrow, I'm going to cut your head off. The disciple goes home, comes back the next day and says, Master, I memorized them all. The point of the story is that once we have a forcing function, we look at things very, very differently. And I'm not suggesting that go home, deploy passkeys, come back tomorrow, or what I am saying, though, that look at the AI-driven attacks as that forcing function. If you do not have the basic building blocks done today, then the problem may become almost too big to handle. So my closing recommendation to all of you would be, go home, deploy your passkeys, because I think we are at a point where we have moved away from the conversation of should we be doing it into how do we prioritize it. So that's one. Second one would be that bring your use cases, join the discussion around verifiable credentials and e-wallets, and bring that to closer. And then the third would be that start on your fraud detection journey. You don't want to be in a spot where you are subject to a breach or a ransomware attack or an incident that disrupts your business. And with the innovation that we are seeing in the AI-driven attacks, in an year or two, it may be too much of a task for you to climb that mountain, so get the basics done before you become into that problem. I want to thank you for having me. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to secure every digital moment, every secure digital interaction, and then build trust in the process. Thank you.